Spyro the Dragon. Hero, savior, war profiteer, but above all else, a really fun platforming franchise. You know, until it wasn't. I have always loved Spyro the Dragon, although according to my mother, I haven't always been good at it. I was like 5, Mom, let it go. To me, the Purple Dragon's adventures far exceed his orange marsupial rival, and while I may be alone in thinking that, I don't think too many would disagree when I say that the original trilogy on PS1 are some of the best platformers ever created. Spyro sits right up there with the greats. But just how great does he really get? Well, I intend to find out. I'm going to play through every single Spyro the Dragon video game until I find what we can all truly agree is the greatest Spyro video game of all time. And it all starts back in the distant year of 1998. Fresh off the coattails of Crash Bandicoot, Spyro the Dragon would release in a quite honestly astonishing state. Don't get me wrong, Crash was impressive, but Spyro was a full, almost seamless game. In Spyro the Dragon, you control the aforementioned Spyro, who is a dragon, as you run around and jump. Pretty standard for a platformer. But add to that a charge to get around faster, a wide area flame breath for taking down enemies, and a glide to make tricky long jumps, and the control in this game is still fantastic to this day. Mario 64 and Crash were great in their own rights, but also required a level of precision at times that just wasn't as easy to pull off in 3D games at the time. The focus on explorative platforming and wide-hitting attacks meant that you didn't need to be perfect to still play the game. And rather than a level-by-level progression, Spyro stuck to the more collection-based style that games like Mario 64 had. Each world saw you needing to collect enough of a certain collectible to move on to the next, and they changed up what you needed every time to make you search around a bit. Although I imagine most people playing this game would want to get every single item possible for 100%, especially knowing that there's an extra bonus stage to unlock with tons of loot. Another thing Spyro has that Crash didn't is a quirky little side character that represents your health. Similar to Aku Aku from Crash, Sparx the Dragonfly was a cute little guy floating around your character instead of having a health bar glued on screen. As you take damage, he changes color or downright disappears, and instead of collecting meat or other health pickups, you keep him healthy by feeding him butterflies from the charred remains of peaceful fauna. But don't trust those sheep. This also feels like the beginnings of an open world game. You didn't have a level select screen or a tiny room with portals, you had a full-on area to explore to find entrances to the levels you needed to complete. There were still loading screens though, it wasn't that advanced. The beginning of this franchise was already pushing the boundaries with their level design to see what they could manage. There was a very clear set of rules, but they were always finding clever ways to toy with those rules. Gliding around cliffs, fancy supercharged pathing, enemies that affect terrain, each level had something new to experiment with. It doesn't sit still for very long when it would rather throw a new enemy type at you and watch you react on the fly. My own personal shout out to the level Treetops, which is probably the most frustrating level on a first playthrough, but a very satisfying one after that. The game forces you to change the way you think about the basic institutions in order to find this utterly insane path around the level in order to reach the final collectibles. This may be starting to sound like the perfect game, and while it definitely is, I have neglected to tell you about one of the dark stains that hides beneath the surface: the bosses. The original Spyro the Dragon is infamous for having some of the worst boss fights in video game history. Not because they're challenging or unfair, but the exact opposite. Every single boss is a joke. Most bosses give you exactly 0 challenge, especially on repeat attempts. They either run away from you and throw the easiest to dodge attack, or stand still and throw the easiest to dodge attacks. Told you not to trust those sheep. Even the big bad nasty Nork that Spyro can't wait to go up against just runs away for most of his fight. Truly, this tiny purple dragon must be the scariest thing anyone's ever seen. You know, aside from every other enemy who will attack you head on. Damn you dogs! But it is clear to see what the intent was. Even the boss stages tend to be smaller levels to run around and collect things in. The bosses themselves weren't meant to be a big change in gameplay, they were meant to be platforming in a boss fight. And Spyro's control is fun enough that there's no real need to divert from that. A+. But it truly was just the beginning, as 1 year later we'd get a sequel with bigger levels, more collectibles, and even more lovable characters. Sometimes a bit too lovable. Oh god, why does Spyro have a love interest, and why are they mostly humanoid? In 1999 we would be absolutely blessed with an amazing sequel with Spyro 2 Ripto's Rage, or Gateway to Glimmer if you're unfortunate enough. Why is it named after the first level? For the most part, this game plays exactly like a new and improved Spyro game. The basic controls are all the same, the core level design is still there, and the adventure is still laid out in pretty much the same way. The only new addition to Spyro's basic movement is this small hover move you can do at the end of a glide for just a teeny bit more air. The roll got removed, but nobody remembers that move anyway, and they added it back in for the remake. In this game, Spyro attempts to take a vacation. He's not very good at it though, because a mole professor working on a portal device finally gets it working and summons him to another dimension? I'll be honest, I'm not entirely certain. Turns out though, the guy they want him to beat hates dragons, so they kinda scored big. Especially considering they got the only dragon willing to do anything in a crisis. I'm looking at all of you from Spyro 1. Perhaps one of the biggest and most notorious changes is this big buffoon of a bear named Moneybags. If my parents named me Moneybags, I'd be livid, but I guess he lives up to the name since his one goal in life is to take every single gem in Spyro's collection. Bridge is out, you know he's behind it. Can't progress because you don't know how to swim? Moneybags has an answer for you. Just about the only thing he won't resort to for money is helping the villain. We'll get back to that later. And as much as this character is a monster and deserves to spend eternity in the deepest, darkest pits of the coldest and loneliest place on the planet, he really isn't that bad. Sure, he's a roadblock more than anything else, but it's just the same as requiring a certain number of collectibles before moving on to another stage. The only slightly frustrating part is that this adds backtracking to the game, but it's only a few times total, so it's not really a big deal. It is, however, a good point to transition to. See, one of the things Moneybags delivers in this game are new moves for Spyro. The ability to swim, climb ladders, and this special head bash move are all locked behind payments in each world. This gives you a natural reason to revisit previous worlds, as certain collectibles will require moves you don't currently have. It is a bit of a nuisance to have to travel back just for a couple of worlds that you barely couldn't complete, but it combines with one other thing to ruin my life. In Spyro 1, when you collected gems, your total for the current level would display as you did. So while you might not know exactly how many gems were in the level, it was always a multiple of 100, and you could make a guess when you were getting close. In Spyro 2, you spend gems sometimes, so it instead displays your total gems currently owned. Combined with the fact that some worlds can't be 100%ed on the first visit, but need to be at least completed to progress, means that that nice even number is gone. Gone, I say! You don't know how badly I needed to get that off my chest. That being said though, I have played this game too many times and I'm kind of over it. I don't need to know when I'm close or how many are left when I remember every single gem by heart. Now I'm much more distracted by Spyro's war profiteering. Yeah, you all thought that Spyro was the hero, but he's playing both sides for a quick buck. Or gem, I guess. In addition to gems, we have a new collectible in this game, orbs. Rather than saving dragons in environments that nobody seems to be living in, Spyro 2 is populated with NPCs who sometimes want you to do chores for them. Complete these chores or entertain a hunter's ADHD for a bit and they'll give you an orb. There aren't as many this time around, but you generally have to do a bit more than walk up to them, so this balances out. And rather than checkpoints that force you to have a certain number of collectibles, each level now has a mandatory talisman to collect in order to get to the next world. Until they don't, what the hell is this? I'm sorry, it's just a bit strange that the final boss requires you to collect a lot of orbs to confront. It doesn't matter to me, I collect all of them, but why not use the same system? Why is the final boss locked to only people who are willing to be minor completionists? Again, being fair, you do need orbs to open up some levels along the way, and as well as that, you only need 40 out of all 64 orbs to complete the game, and there are a good chunk of easy orbs to grab. But there's already a completion bonus, why can't the main game be beatable by dumb 5-year-old children like me? They also stepped up the difficulty of the bosses. They're not hard now, but they are actually bosses. They can be a bit long in my opinion, especially Crush, who you can only hit during certain windows and you have to wait around the rest of the time. But still, a big step up from the first game's bosses. And for people who like to complete games like I do, there is one challenge that stands out above all else. No, not that one. Hunter with cement shoes. Not only do you have to escort this dumb alchemist the long way around to reach the building next door, but if you haven't unlocked the head bash at this point, you can't complete the follow-up challenge. Considering most people playing for the first time would have no clue they needed it, and it isn't obtainable until at least beating this world, chances are you'll have to come back later. And when you do, you have to redo the entire first mission because Hunter decided he liked the shoes after all! And speaking of completion bonuses, which we definitely were, do you like power-ups? Oh, I haven't mentioned those yet, and this transition is wasted? Damn. Spyro 2 spices up the gameplay with special power-up gates. Instead of enemies dropping gems, you must now collect the souls of the dead in order to power the professor's new invention. Holy shit, that is dark. Once powered up, walking through them gives Spyro a temporary power-up based on the stage. They're pretty clever sometimes. Of course, there's the classic Super Fire Breath that shoots an explosive fireball capable of destroying any breakable object, but there are also good power-ups too, like the Supercharge returning from Spyro 1, a Super Bounce that can create shortcuts or reach new areas, and Temporary Flight, which you'd think you would always have considering you're a dragon. I think they're pretty fun, and the challenges surrounding them are also pretty interesting. It's just a shame that they're only temporary, and I got my transition back! If you collect everything everything in the game, there is a special permanent fire breath power-up in the bonus level Dragon Shores. You might think this is lame, you already collected everything after all, but you might be underestimating its permanence. If you have done this and start a new save file, you can have the super fire breath for the whole game. A lot of people may be normal and not necessarily want to play a game they've already beaten, but I play this game like once a year, and having this power-up is so fun to just break the game with. Most importantly, you can use it to kill these guys that normally make the Alchemist challenge difficult. After all these years, I've gotten my revenge! Some challenges you weren't meant to complete early on become beatable, and a lot of the slightly more annoying things in the game are now trivial. It's honestly one of the best completion rewards I've ever seen in any video game, let alone a Spyro one. Surely they keep this in future titles. 2000 gave us many things. It gave us Onyx, whom this video and all videos are dedicated to. It also gave us Spyro Year of the Dragon. Get it? Because 2000 was a Year of the Dragon in the Chinese Zodiac? In Year of the Dragon, Spyro heads to yet another new land. Why the story needed to justify all this, I'm not certain. But this time an evil sorceress from the Forgotten Realms steals all of the dragon eggs, and Spyro has to chase after them in order to get them back. At least this time the other dragons try to help, but are too fat. I can't make this stuff up. So instead of orbs this time around, we have to collect the missing dragon egg. The structure is practically identical to Spyro 2, but with a lot more to do, including a whopping 150 eggs, only 100 of which are needed to challenge the final boss. One small change I like is that rather than hunting down magical talismans in each level, you're recruiting the help of the locals. After solving some problem they have, they each band together to help Spyro build a new transportation device to get to the next world. And they gave him an egg. And of course, in the year 2000, there was no way you could make a game about Spyro the Dragon without one very, very important detail: skateboards. There are so many other things to talk about in this game, but I would be a fool if I didn't immediately talk about the skateboarding challenges. Yes, plural. For some reason, the geniuses at Insomniac Games, and I don't know if I'm being sarcastic, but they decided it would be a great idea to take their dragon character capable of flying and gliding and slap him on a skateboard. And it actually works for me. It can be a little loose and difficult to control compared to Spyro, but skateboarding games were really popular at the time, I get it. As a matter of fact, this game has an awful lot of not controlling Spyro. There are tons of vehicles in this game. They generally only show up for a challenge or two, so they aren't the most complex things in the world, but they do provide a nice change of pace. As well as vehicles, there are 5 entirely new playable characters. Honestly, there are so many times that you're not controlling Spyro that it's almost too much change of pace. Spyro controls really well, and a lot of the other characters are fine, but a bit sluggish in comparison. This is especially true when it comes to Bentley. There's very little platforming in his stages, and he doesn't have any sort of special movement, so you're stuck walking around for a long time. There are only like 2 levels where you actually control him though, so it's not that bad. The other characters aren't much better, really. Sheila the kangaroo is very vertically oriented, but moves just a bit too slowly for my taste. It always feels like she's being pulled back when you try to jump. Sergeant Byrd the flying penguin can go a bit faster, but his stages are usually pretty cramped, which makes it hard to maneuver anyway, especially with his floaty control. There was one time they gave you a big open area to fly around in that is easily the best Sergeant Byrd level by far. We've already covered Bentley, which just leaves Agent 9. The remake did a great job improving him, but he can still feel a little slow as a shooter character tacked onto a platforming game. But I'm also going to repress any memories of his stages in the original PS1 game, so it's time to move on. Perhaps my favorite playable character is the only one not entirely new: Sparx. Your Dragonfly companion can now travel to special stages to beat up some bugs, and they're just little top-down shooter stages, and they're honestly kind of fun. They're not super complex, but compared to everything else in this game that retains at least a little bit of platforming at its core, this is a completely fresh minigame to play when you're ready to take a break. Not only that, but completing Sparx' stages unlocks special abilities for Spyro. In the original, this would unlock great abilities, improving Sparx' reach and allowing him to break basic baskets, giving him a teleport function, and even a gem locator. In the remake, those last 2 are standard features, but the other upgrades remain untouched. I'm a real sucker for upgrades. Ultimately, aside from the extra hit point, most of these feel like things you should have to begin with. And breaking baskets seems neat, but it's also the last upgrade, so if you're playing to complete everything, which is probably the only reason you're doing the Sparx levels to begin with, you probably already broke every basket in the game. And these, as far as I know, don't carry over like the cool completion reward from Spyro 2. Speaking of repetitive transitions, Spyro 3 also has an extra level for completing it. This time it is just called Super Bonus Round, and it's really lame. The first 2 games had actual in-universe locations, but at the very least you do get to have a rematch with the final boss for an extra egg at the end of this one. It also has some vehicle and flying segments that can be pretty fun. For the most part, Spyro 3 is is just more of what made Spyro 2 good. I think it's a bit more nostalgic for me, but all in all, they're fairly similar. As a matter of fact, they were both supposed to have 4 hub worlds as well, which would have given them pretty much the same layout. And just a little fun thing that I like, in Spyro 2, the stages are named after seasons, which is probably the biggest hint that there were originally planned to be 4 of them. But all we got were Summer Forest, Autumn Plains, and Winter Tundra. But Spyro 3's locations were based on times of day, getting closer to night as you travel through the game. The first location, Sunrise Spring, fits both of these motifs and finishes up the seasonal theme from before. Kinda cool, huh? I really like this one though. It's the one that I remember most from my childhood. When I was younger, I think more playable characters was always a good thing, even if they weren't as fleshed out. But even with the more sluggish controls, there is a lot to do and some good fun to be had. Although maybe not quite as put together as Spyro 2, it still lands in the A tier. And that was the last of the Spyro games made by Insomniac. Their agreement was up and they had better things to do, but Spyro was in his prime. Surely they wouldn't stop making games so soon. If only they did. Digital Eclipse would go on to make a few games on the GBA for the Purple Dragon. And while Crash Bandicoot did basically the same thing, I'm not sure this was a good idea. Spyro games were always a bit more about open 3D exploration, and the Crash games always had linear 2D side-scrolling sections, making it easier to adapt them. And with Spyro Season of Ice on GBA, it would soon become clear exactly what issues it would have. I remember liking this one a lot as a kid, but replaying it, I have no idea why. Firstly, with what they were given, the game honestly isn't too bad to control at first. The isometric design is simple to understand, and if there's just stuff all over the place, it's easy to run around and pick it up. But then you try to do just about anything else, and the problems start piling up quick. First of all, the layout of the game doesn't make it obvious where you can and can't glide. So sometimes you try a glide multiple times, thinking you can make it if you do it better, even if you can't. And even if you wanted to, it's near impossible sometimes because this game has absolutely no sense of direction. Giant, samey locations with zero landmarks or maps to point you in any sort of direction mean that you spend every level wandering aimlessly, hoping to run into something new. And new is a bit of a stretch, considering every objective is nearly identical. You have your basic find a thing by running into it, and almost every other objective is a find and flame X number of thing. And when you can't tell where you've been, where you are, or where you're going, missions like this are a pain in the ass. And that's not even the half of it, because if you take a bad glide and die, which you're going to do, you end up at the start of the level with all progress on those missions reset. And even if you're great at the game and never die, when you do complete a mission, it teleports you to wherever the fairy is that you get for completing it, with no indication of where you've traveled. At least the Sparx stages make a return, if you're willing to play long enough to get to one. I'm not. Moving on. Honestly, the game wouldn't be nearly as bad if there was just some way to tell where you were, because at its core, it is just simple Spyro fun, running around, bashing baddies, and collecting things. As it stands, it sits squarely in the D tier. Luckily for me, they didn't stop there. Immediately following Season of Ice was a full-on sequel called Spyro 2 Season of Flame. Yeah, sure, give the handheld spin-offs numbers, that won't be confusing at all. Season of Flame for the Game Boy Advance is pretty much more of the same, except, wait, better? Yeah, this game is kind of improved quite a bit. Thinking back on it, I played a lot of Season of Ice as a kid, but as soon as the sequel came out, I don't think I touched it very much. The controls are pretty much the same, but all of the design around it makes things much more manageable. Levels are a bit more linear, checkpoint fairies make a return, and the camera points a bit in the direction you're moving to help you see what's ahead of you. Honestly, they added something to just about every aspect of this game in order to make it more enjoyable. For starters, Spyro has multiple different breath attacks that he can use, and once unlocked, you can swap between them by using select. They don't act much differently in terms of enemies, but certain obstacles require to use either your ice or fire breath to get past them. In addition to that, power-up gates are here as well, like the super ice power that allows you to freeze specific sections of the ocean to cross them. It's nothing super crazy, but it is always satisfying to create more platforms in a platformer. Also, some of the playable characters from Spyro 3 see a return here as well. For example, Agent 9 has these fun side-scrolling run-and-gun stages that aren't the greatest, but are good enough for a break from the main loop. But I really enjoyed the Sheila stages here. Her levels are still isometric, but now they feature a grid-based system that you quickly hop around. It's almost more of a puzzle platformer with the way you have to find the correct path to reach what you're looking for. The challenge gates also see a return, for Spyro to head through and do some sort of minigame on the other side. Again, nothing too thrilling, but all of these little additions make the game feel much more complete. But aside from that, it really is very similar to Season of Ice. Still no map means it's still pretty easy to get lost, although the linear stages make it way easier to navigate, and the glides are a bit more obvious. You know what? B tier. But Digital Eclipse weren't the only ones trusted with our lovable Purple Dragon. He was also handed off to Check 6 Studios, with Equinox Digital Entertainment handling the artwork. With 2 separate studios handling the game, that's a lot of power. That means that Spyro's transition to the PS2, his debut on the next generation of consoles, is going to be the most F-tier game possible for this list. How? Not every franchise survived the transition to PS2. As a matter of fact, most of them didn't, and Spyro was certainly no exception. Spyro Enter the Dragonfly has all the groundwork to be a decent entry in the franchise, namely that it is Spyro and Spyro is good, but there couldn't be a worse execution. For starters, oh my god, this game is slow. Everything is so big and spread out, and the game does not run well, so it takes forever to do anything. I 100%ed this game when I was younger. How much free time did I have? On top of that, this is easily the ugliest Spyro and crew have ever been. Nothing in this game is appealing, but the character models look worse than the PS1 version somehow. And as I mentioned before, the level designs are just terrible. So much wide open space with nothing populating it, which is a shame because if the level design were better, it might have solved the frame rate issue considering there would be less to load. There are a lot of things in this game that seem like they could have been great if only the devs had any idea what they were doing. For one thing, the different elemental breaths from Season of Flame are present and expanded upon here, although maybe having a breath that is only useful for catching dragonflies was a bad call. See, instead of dragons, orbs, eggs, or fairies, this time we're collecting dragonflies, which is also a bit similar to Season of Flame, which had you collecting fireflies. Spyro plagiarism? Obviously not, this game is way worse than the GBA one. I want to redeem this game so badly. I want there to be a reason that I spent a lot of time on it as a kid. It's just so hard. I mean, each level had its own method of transportation, and the characters were varied and interesting, but how do you get past this gameplay? Oh yeah, you get past it by bugging the whole thing and beating the final boss at the start of the game. It's not worth talking more about this game. If you've ever heard of it before, it was probably surrounded by words like garbage, mess, and awful, so you know exactly how bad it is already. I mean, the guy recording for the demo screen didn't even want to play the game. Why should I? Put it in F tier again. Spyro was quickly slipping away from us. It would only be a matter of time before they shilled him out to sell a completely different franchise. But it's okay because Digital Eclipse was still making handheld titles. Surely they wouldn't let us down, right? I've actually never played Attack of the Rhynocs. I mean, they didn't call it Spyro 3, how was my mom supposed to know? This game is odd. It's a fully open 2.5D Metroidvania game? Yeah, no kidding. Apparently in this game you have to go to each of the 12 worlds and collect their hearts, which mostly involves you traveling to different areas to do quests for people. Sometimes quests give rewards that are needed for other quests, and occasionally they give Spyro new upgrades to use elsewhere. I'll be honest, this game flew under my radar until I decided to make this video, but it's quite honestly an interesting concept. Unfortunately, it still controls similarly to the last two GBA games, so I'll pass for now. I don't know, 3 tier? Perhaps the best thing I can say about this next game is that it doesn't play similarly to the other GBA titles. You know Crash Bandicoot? Of course you do. You love Crash Bandicoot, you weirdo. Well, so did everyone else, and the two were joined by Destiny. Constant teasing and hints in each franchise for the other meant that fans were going crazy waiting for some form of crossover. And they would finally get their wish with Crash Purple and, of course, Spyro Orange. These games are not great. Crash Purple is one thing, just a mediocre Crash Bandicoot game. Spyro Orange, on the other hand, is by far the worst thing that has ever happened to Spyro. Instead of exploration and platforming, this game is mostly about minor platforming from one minigame to the next. And not only are most of the minigames super slow, but they're also basically the same thing. Slow-moving auto-scrollers. So the game can get pretty repetitive and boring. Honestly, it almost feels a bit like Crash Bash in that regard. Except I actually like Crash Bash, which is weird, I know. But similarly to Crash Bash, you're not done just because you completed the extremely slow and boring minigame. In order to beat the game, you have to do every single minigame 3 times over, getting slightly harder each time. I can't say much else about it, mostly because there is nothing else to say. If somehow I haven't sold enough how bad this game is, trust me, you don't want to play it. The only cool thing about it is that it did the Zelda Oracles games thing, and you needed to beat both Crash Purple and Spyro Orange to fully beat the games. Except it isn't cool because both games are bad, so why would you want to play them? F tier. At this point, it was pretty clear where Spyro was heading, right down the drain. With Enter the Dragonfly failing as much as it did, it felt like Spyro just wasn't meant for the modern age. Games were different now, and once you make a terrible game, you're not generally trusted with another. So instead, the lovable dragon was transferred into the loving hands of Eurocom, the same crew who made Crash Bash and Disney's action game Hercules. Oh my god, we're doomed. And you know, I hate to say it, but S tier. Absolutely S tier. As a matter of fact, put it in there 3 times. I loved Spyro: A Hero's Tale. After the mess of a game before it, I guess they wanted to change some things up going forward, and oh man, did they do a great job of that. A Hero's Tale, dyslexically shortened to HAT, takes the standard Spyro formula and expands it into a fully open world game, or as open world as you can get on the PS2. The platforming here feels great, with Spyro getting a double jump before his glide, and a few extra moves here and there throughout the story. The game's puzzles are great as well. They rely on the same breath system as Enter the Dragonfly, except mostly better. You start with your standard fire breath, and as you defeat bosses, you unlock lightning, water, fire, and ice breaths. They're also not a short, snappy breath anymore, but can be held down for a few seconds. That makes the fire breath very satisfying and safe, kind of like a pyrocitor from Ratchet & Clank. It all comes full circle. The ice breath is also pretty similar, except it freezes enemies instead of outright killing them. But the lightning breath actually needs to be held down on enemies to work, the trade-off being that it has longer range and works on more enemies. But mostly the different breaths are just meant to solve different puzzles, including some that require you to explore or backtrack. The level design is very fun to travel around, and for those who don't like to sightsee, you can purchase fast travel from your nearest Moneybags shop. That's right, this game has a shop system. Rather than a limited amount of gems per level, you're pretty constantly getting huge piles of them to spend. There is no completion requirement or anything, but you can buy a handful of decent power-ups, from one-time uses to consumables to make your life easier. It's also relatively well-tuned in terms of the value of the currency. Most games either have things very expensive and you have to be very choosy, or so cheap that it doesn't matter, but this game hits a good middle ground. And more importantly than that, Moneybags is hilarious. That's actually a pretty common theme for this game. The writing is fantastic. Did you know Spyro had a girlfriend? Well, apparently neither did he. She shows up at the beginning of the game and tells Spyro that if he goes on this adventure, they may never see each other again, and then disappears, gone from the game forever. Every character in the game is just as funny, even the other playable ones. Oh right, I forgot to mention, for the first time ever, Hunter is playable. There are 5 playable characters again in this game, and surprisingly, they're almost all enjoyable. Sparx comes back with linear corridor shoot-'em-up stages that are just okay. I think they can be a bit annoying and a bit difficult at times, and insanely boring at others. They take a while, and you have to do them twice if you want every collectible. Unfortunately, that's true for every minigame challenge. Sergeant Byrd comes back in his own minigames that play like the flying levels from the original trilogy. He has a rocket boost and lock-on missiles though, so they're infinitely better this time around. And the last minigame character is Blinks the Mole, the nephew of the professor. His stages are underground exploration missions that are really slow. The controls are fine, but there are some sections where you have to do a lot of waiting, and impatience can easily kill you, causing you to repeat big chunks of the stage. They're ultimately okay as well, but if you're doing poorly, they can really get on your nerves. Now, I haven't explained Hunter, even though I just said that was the last one. Well, Hunter is the only other playable character to just exist in the overworld. There are only a few times you play as him, but he has control the most similar to Spyro, with platforming, minor exploration, and puzzles. Instead of fire breath and gliding, though, Hunter can shoot a bow and reflect projectiles with it. You know, just like a normal bow. His challenges are more about planning and looking ahead to see what enemies might be around, since you can take them out from afar. And of course, no game is without flaws. I won't even say that about this game, even though it is my favorite Spyro game of all time, and most people don't even know about it. But there are so many great lines and moments and areas and puzzles and collection elements, and you get unlockable playable characters, including the girlfriend from the beginning of the game that never shows up again. So yeah, good game. And here is where I have to make a confession. I lied. I'm not ranking every single Spyro game. There are a couple of mobile games that I don't care to get my hands on, and also this DS game that serves as a sort of sequel to Hat, but only from a story standpoint. The reason I'm not playing this one is I know I do not have the patience. It is a very slow RPG beat-em-up style game, and if I played through the whole thing just to review it, this video would come out next year. This might be a good time to mention that no, I don't consider Skylanders to be a Spyro game. That's a whole other can of worms. Luckily for me, the first beat-em-up was terrible anyway, and somehow just as slow as the Skylanders franchise. The Legend of Spyro franchise was a bit weird in general. Spyro went from having SpongeBob's voice to having Frodo's, and Sparx was voiced by Kuzco. But beyond that, the game is as boring as it could possibly be. The story isn't super interesting. It's a basic, go to these places, save these guys, get these powers. It's so formulaic you'd think they were setting up for a trilogy of these games. What really makes this game bad though is the actual gameplay. At no point does it truly evolve beyond mashing buttons, and if you do what I did and just max the firebomb quickly, it becomes a cakewalk. You just go from room to room fighting the same enemies in different areas that barely feel any different, over and over and over again. Even just waiting for some of the cutscenes or the walking takes so long that I can't do this anymore. When did Spyro become so slow? D tier. Hopefully the next game isn't as slow. Good news! It's slower! The second Legend of Spyro game, The Eternal Night, continues the new series by copying everything about it, right down to the lengthy title. Spyro has forgotten all of his powers for some reason, so yet again you have to learn a new one in each level that you go to. The main difference this time is that you have a new power that you can use whenever you want. By the press of a single button, Spyro can turn this game into Enter the Dragonfly. By slowing things down, you can more easily make certain jumps, and I guess you can plan your strategy a bit in combat. It doesn't slow down the world around you though, it slows down everything, including Spyro. So it's not like it gives you an advantage in the fights, it just allows you to think a bit more. I wish it did give you an advantage because the combat is a lot harder in this one. Even basic enemies can take a big chunk of Spyro's health, and you don't have the overpowered firebomb in this game. game. Most of this sounds bad, but it does make the game a lot less boring than A New Beginning, and makes you think about using the different breaths a bit more for their different strategies. There's also a bit more thought in the platforming, which was a welcome change, but all in all, it's still just the same adventure. As a matter of fact, the first game probably should have been this polished, and then the trilogy might have worked a bit better. Spyro has far too many bad games. It's kind of depressing. It's a franchise I've always loved, but the reworked trilogy has terrible combat, and the story is so bad that you fell asleep when I described it and woke back up just now after I finished. It's just all a bit bland and mediocre. And while Eternal Night did a bit to fix the repetition by providing more variety to each breath ability, it's still bogged down by the upgrade system that is prevalent in both games. In a very Fable-esque way, Spyro can gain special gems that are used specifically to increase the power of his abilities. In essence, it's just experience, but you can use it to improve any of your 4 primary breaths once unlocked, which means there's a good chance that you have a stronger one and you will abuse that in every fight that you can. Of course, there are also elemental matchups to a certain extent, and not every enemy can be hit by the same things. You'd think this would help the variety, but none of the separate systems are fleshed out enough to justify using a specific move in a certain situation. Usually, there are a bunch of enemies swarming you, and you find one strong AoE attack and abuse it. This is way easier in the original game, but removing the overpowered firebomb doesn't make the second title more fun, just more of a slog. And in case you're upset that I skipped the story, it's as simple as the gameplay. Bad things are happening, go find the good guys because you have to learn to be the ultimate good guy and save the day. I remember loving the character Cinder when I was younger, probably because edgy, dark, brooding characters were my favorite, but honestly, she just barely exists in either game, and she was the last boss of the first one. The story genuinely doesn't get much deeper, even with it looking like they wanted to tackle some deeper themes sometimes. They get too caught up in this whole Spyro is a purple dragon and therefore a hero prophecy nonsense, and it's a shame because this trilogy is probably the main reason Spyro died out. And I still have to talk about the third one, which is obviously way better? Wait, this game is actually kind of good. I guess the goodwill of Spyro fans was gone a bit too soon because this game is actually, dare I say, a little bit fun. The game almost feels like an entirely different franchise. If it weren't for a very similar core gameplay, it might even be confusing. Spyro and Cinder were trapped together for a long time and emerge in a land unknown to them, stuck together with the magical device of 2-player local co-op. That's right, for some reason, this game is a co-op game. Still fully playable solo, but I absolutely love playing games with my non-existent friends, so this easily gets bonus points. And rather than being the slowest, most linear and boring beat-em-up, it's a lot more open with random puzzles to solve and free flying section. It's wild how much this game does right, but honestly, it was a bit too late. Nothing is amazing here, it's all just good, and sometimes just average. The core gameplay is a bit better, especially with the ability to dodge things now, but it's nothing you'd write home about. And trust me, my mother would want me to write to her about Spyro. It does manage to shed the horrible limitations of its predecessors, but only barely. C tier. Oh, and I forgot to do Eternal Night. D tier. It isn't surprising that Spyro isn't really a hot topic these days. If anything, it is kind of impressive that they decided to dig Crash out of the very same hole. I guess being a mascot for the Skylanders franchise is all he has left in him. Let's just hope that that series doesn't also— oh, it's been dead for years. Who am I kidding? If you're still here, I appreciate you listening to me babble on about one of my favorite franchises. You should definitely check out Spyro's hat if you ever have the time, and since you got this far, why not subscribe? Lord knows it won't affect the algorithm, but it will help me eat bread. And if there's any franchise you love to death from your childhood, feel free to leave a comment so I can put all your favorites in F tier. And just in case you hate YouTube autoplay and want another 40 minutes away from it, here's a good video to click on about Switch games.